This is StoryBeat, Storytellers on Storytelling, an exploration into how master storytellers and artists develop and build brilliant stories and works of art that people everywhere love and admire. So join us as we discover how talented creators of all kinds find success in the worlds of imagination and entertainment. Here now is your host, Steve Cuden.
Thanks for joining us on StoryBeat. We're coming to you from the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University in the heart of downtown Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania. I'm delighted to have LA-based writer and producer Laura Harkcom join me today. Laura co-created, wrote, and produced the TV series The Lost Room for the SyFy Channel. The show was nominated for 2 Emmys and a Writers Guild Award. The New York Times called it a jackpot for a mystery series, while Entertainment Weekly cited it as a stark noir pulpy fiction, spiritual thriller, hero's quest fantasy, and brainy video game all at once. She's also written feature scripts for Columbia Pictures, Miramax Films, and the Weinstein Company, and co-created the comic book series We Kill Monsters, currently in pre-production as a feature film at Imagine Entertainment. Prior to writing and producing, Laura was a studio executive at Warner Brothers, where she oversaw the critically acclaimed film The Iron Giant. For the past 15 years, Laura has also worked as a television and feature film consultant for clients such as NBC Universal, DreamWorks SKG, the Korean Film Council, and private clients, many private clients. Some of them have gone on to great things. Most recently, she's co-created and executive produced the sci-fi television show The Building for Fox Television Studios. Neil Gaiman has recently come on board to shepherd development. Born and raised in Pittsburgh, right here where we produce the podcast, Laura received her BA in Writing and Theater Arts from Carnegie Mellon University. You can learn more about Laura at www.lauraharkcom.com. Well, it's a truly great honor for me to have the very talented Laura Harkcom as my guest today on StoryBeat. Laura, welcome.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you for having me. It's a pleasure to be here.
It's my pleasure to have you for sure. So the tagline on your website I found great. It says, "I develop ideas for film and television." Let's just jump in here. Describe for me what the development process is for you and how it unfolds.
Sure. Well, it depends on what it is I'm developing. Because I do, as you kind of covered in my bio, I have created my own project, but I also help other people develop their ideas as well when I'm working as a consultant. So it kind of depends on what I'm doing, and then it also depends on the format, whether it's, I've primarily worked in features and television, but I've also done some comic book work as well.
So let's start with features. If you're going to develop a feature today, what would be your first step?
My first step would be if it were my own project. My first step after I come up with the initial concept is almost always research. Even if it's something, even if the subject is, or the character is a profession or a subject that I'm familiar with, I still generally do a fair amount of research just to try to make the story or the character as specific, give it as many specific details as possible so that it's grounded in as much reality as possible. And that actually goes for any of my science fiction or fantasy projects as well, because I always feel as though if something isn't grounded in some semblance of reality, even if it is science fiction, if there isn't something that you can give your reader or your audience to hold on to and identify with, you're going to lose them very quickly.
And that has, I assume, something to do with the old adage of write what you know. And so if you don't know something, it's hard to write about it. So therefore, knowing something is helpful.
Yeah, absolutely. In fact, I was just speaking with a client yesterday we were talking about one of our mutual favorite TV shows is a show called Billions on Showtime.
Mm-hmm.
And we were talking about something that he was telling me that just took him right out of the show and disappointed him so much. And it was a scene about the protagonist trying to blackmail somebody who owned a scrap metal yard. And I asked the client, I said, what bothered you about that so much? And it turns out that he had worked in the recycling business his whole life, owning a recycling company. And he said it just wouldn't happen that way. There's not just one, there's not just one scrap metal yard in the whole world. And, you can't just blackmail one person and take down a whole industry, So it was just that little lack of, verisimilitude, that little bit of, kind of the show fudging, the reality of how that situation would work in the real world that pulled him right out of it,
right,
because he had personal experience with that. So, so I do try anything that I'm writing about that I don't have personal experience with. I always try to do my due diligence.
All right. So once you've gathered this information and you seem familiar with it, and it's sort of marinated in your thought process, what's your next step? What do you tend to do?
I tend to outline obsessively. I just really do an incredibly thorough beat. I call them beat sheets.
Sure.
So they are just, all the main story beats for the feature. So, everything that happens in Act 1, everything that happens in Act 2, and every important thing that happens in Act 3, and I break it down.
About how many beats do you put when you do a
structure.
beat sheet? About how many beats in a feature?
For a feature, I tend to do. Excuse me. I've seen beat sheets. And when I've consulted for studios sometimes, and we're working on a movie, they'll want to keep it to 25 beats, but I prefer to do around 50. I think 50 for my especially for my own purposes, I feel like that gives me a really good coverage of all the main points of action in a movie. Otherwise, I feel like I'm condensing too much.
In some detail. When you get to the 50 or 60 beats, you're really getting some detail that you can write from, yeah?
Yes, but it's not, even though it's 50 or 60 beats, it's not 25 pages, it's, 3 pages.
Mm-hmm.
It's really the beat itself is crystallized down into 1 or 2 sentences.
So we're on to this, but I didn't intend it this way. But if you were to check out my book, Beating Hollywood, you would find that there are 40 movies in there that are broken down by beats. So they're very famous movies, 40 classics, The Godfather, Chinatown, and so on, and they're all broken down into narrative beats, so you can actually see how those movies are structured. So when you brought that up, I said, that is the way to go. That is a great way to see the structure of the movie. And
yes, and now how many beats in your beat sheet?
It's dependent upon the story itself. So they average between 45 and 70 beats per movie. Some are a little more, some are a little less. So Lawrence of Arabia, for instance, it has more beats than your average movie.
Right.
And then it's kind of funny. Sometimes shorter movies actually have lots of beats because I think of a beat, for me, I don't know how, and we'll talk about this because I'm interested in how what you consider to be a beat. For me, I think of a beat as a scene because I think of most scenes as being a single idea. And so that single idea becomes a beat. How do you look at beats?
I would say generally the same way, although sometimes they can be a sequence as well. So a collection of scenes that are all about the same thing. Sometimes in my beat sheets I'll consider that that a beat. But I generally label it as a sequence.
A good example of that would be, for instance, a long chase scene might be one beat.
Exactly, yes, because clearly you're going to be, if in a long chase scene, you're going to be going to multiple locations, But the idea, the core concept is a chase scene. So
Right.
yeah, you can still summarize that in one beat on your beat sheet.
Right, exactly. Okay, so now you've figured out your plot, your structure, however you want to say it, through your beats. At what point did you develop your characters?
Oh, that would be as I'm writing, as I'm creating the idea in my head and as I'm writing the beat sheet, I'm also making sure that the character beats are represented in the beat sheet as well.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm developing my characters in that same process.
In the same process. All right, so now you've got your story in order, you're happy with it, you've done your revisions, and you think that the story's ready to go. Do you immediately start the script?
Yes. Mm-hmm. Yeah, and it's, and it's obviously the first draft, and, it's not, it would never be something that I would finish and then say, okay, I'm done. I just look at it as, okay, here is the first pass at my translation of my beat sheet to the page, to the screenplay format.
Right. And how many drafts do you typically do in a feature-length screenplay before it's at a point where you say, okay, here's a good enough draft to start showing people?
Oh, anywhere from 3 to 6, maybe.
Okay. Okay.
And it also depends if in the past I've written with a partner. So it also depends if I'm writing by myself or if I'm writing with a partner.
Sure.
Because if I'm writing with a partner, we would be passing the script back and forth between each other, and to either taking turns on drafts or even taking turns on different I'll do the first act, you do the second act, that kind of thing. So
and that has that has its own rhythm, doesn't it, working with a partner back and forth?
Absolutely, yes.
And the pace of your writing may shift depending upon which of you are sort of driving the energy at that moment. That's been my experience.
Yes, certainly.
Well,
certainly.
What would you say is, when you're in development, whether it's your own or whether you're working as with a company or a client, what would you say, is there any particular part of development that you like doing more than any other?
Yes, I have found that what I enjoy the most is helping other people develop their ideas. That's
nice.
And I think it goes back to how my career started as a studio executive. That's where that's where I learned that I had no idea that there was such a job as a studio executive,
right.
Where you could hire writers and work with them to develop scripts. And that, I think that's always been my greatest strength, and it's also what I enjoy the most. And
okay, so I'm glad you got into the studio executive thing. We're obviously not going to sit here today and create an entire feature film. So the development, I just wanted to hear whether you do things the way that many other writers do, and you do. You're sort of in the same ballpark or game that everyone else does when in development, which is good to hear. It's comforting that to develop things that other professionals are doing sort of the same thing. But okay, so as an executive, how did you get that job? When you say you didn't know it existed and you didn't know that was there, how did you wind up being an executive that was developing projects?
Well, it was a lot of luck, and being in the right place at the right time, and I think just kind of naturally having that skill set of being able to develop material, although at the time I didn't recognize that that's what it was. But when I was in school at Carnegie Mellon in my playwriting and screenwriting classes, I was, my favorite parts of those classes were critiquing other people's work.
Oh, nice.
yeah, and I found that my teachers responded to my teachers liked my critiques, and the other students liked them as well. Like they didn't see them as critical; they saw them as helpful. So, so I had that kind of skill set, and my very first job was as an intern for a producer at Disney, and it was actually set up through school. It was an internship that I did through school, and my main job for that producer was to read scripts and write
So school
coverage.
helped you grease that wheel.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, I don't think I would have found a job at Disney by myself. I really don't think that would have happened because, like I said, I didn't even know that kind of position existed.
Fascinating. And that job led to you being forced by the job itself to read and read and read. Yes?
Yes. And fortunately, I already loved to read. It's something that, I had loved since I was very young. So it wasn't arduous or anything for me to have to read. When I learned that somebody was going to pay me to sit in a room and read scripts all day and then write about them, or book, I was also reading a lot of manuscripts and novels. I thought that I was the luckiest person in the world, and I still, to this day, when I am working with clients, whether it's a studio or whether it's a private client, I just, my greatest joy is sitting down and reading reading the script and then, giving them feedback on it.
You get to sit there and think to yourself, they're paying me to do this?
Yes, exactly.
And okay, so how long was it from going in as an intern that it turned into a sort of an executive job of some sort?
So it was about, I did that internship, I believe, for about 6 months. And that was it was a non-paying internship. So, I knew, and my boss knew, that I was not going to be able to stay there forever and that I was going to have to find a paying job, because at this point now I had graduated from school and I was, out living in Los Angeles by myself and no income. So I was, for those first 6 months, it was living off of savings. And, so I started looking for a job, and my boss had written me a letter of recommendation for another job within the studio at Disney, at Disney Television Animation, a division of Disney Television Animation that no longer exists. It was a division that made low-budget features.
And we know some similar people from there, don't we?
That's right.
Sharon Morrill, for one.
You were at TV Animation as well.
I was for 2 years.
Yeah.
Yep. So Sharon Morrill is a mutual friend. Yeah.
Yes.
There you go.
Yeah, although I haven't talked to her in years.
Well, me either. But I always had a great relationship with her. So you managed to sort of climb your way over a period of time up into the ranks until you became what? A story editor? What was the title you became?
At Disney, yes. I went, the first position was a paying internship. So I graduated from a non-paying internship to a paying internship.
Yay money.
And then, yes, exactly. And then from there to story editor, which, as you know, in features and television, the title means two completely different things.
Well, tell us.
So
tell our listeners what the two different titles mean.
Sure. So in features, where I was working at the time, it was a story editor is the person who oversees the story department, and the story department is kind of the clearing area for all of the material that's submitted to the studio. So scripts and books and anything that anyone wants to be considered as a movie, anything that anyone's submitting to the studio and saying, look at this and consider making it into a movie, or look at this writer and consider hiring this writer to write one of your movies. Mm-hmm. So they needed at the time, this division of Disney did not have a story department, and they needed a story department. So they asked me to put it together. So just to create a system to kind of track all the material coming in, and also to make sure that all of the material was read in a timely manner, and, you know, that the agents were responded to, or the writers were responded to, and to actually, you know, to read all of that material.
And the other kind of story editor?
Yes. So in television, a story editor is a writer. So in television, there are different levels of writer that you can be, and they all come with different titles. And I believe the hierarchy, the very first entry-level position is a staff writer, and then after staff writer, the next level is story editor. And then there are, you know, kind of subdivisions of those titles, like executive story editor or assistant story editor. And then, you know, when you go above that, then you're producer and co-producer and supervising producer and co-executive producer, and then at the very top is executive producer.
Right. And so it can get confusing if you don't know what you're doing in Hollywood. When somebody says they're a story editor, you have to make sure you know which kind of story editor it is.
That's right, whether they're working in film or television,
And same thing with the title producer, because producers can be different things too.
Oh, yes, absolutely. I mean, yeah, probably that title more so than anything else, because there are creative producers, and there are line producers, and there are non-writing producers and writing producers, and and again, it's different in film and television for that title as well.
Of course, and we're not going to go down the whole delineation, but suffice to say that
right.
if and I'm saying this to the listeners, if you're out there in Hollywood and you're not sure whether it's one kind of a producer or one kind of a story editor or another, you need to make sure before you go in and take a meeting with those folks so that you know exactly what you're doing when you walk in the door. Okay, so when you're working with writers as a development executive, what do you see, or what have you seen over time? What should writers concentrate on when pitching ideas to an executive? What is it that you see that they make mistakes on? What do you see that they do greatly that others should emulate?
I would say the most common mistake I have seen when people are pitching material to me is that they don't have a practiced pitch or this is going to sound strange, but bear with me and I'll kind of explain it. A lot of times what I see is a writer that doesn't seem to know their story well enough, which
that
again
doesn't seem
sounds
strange
because
that doesn't seem strange. That seems like every writer I know. Until they figure it out.
Yeah, I mean, what happens is, you know, you think, well, I wrote this, of course I can pitch it. I'm the only one that can pitch it. I'm the best person to pitch it. But then when somebody starts asking you questions, you know, or if they're not following the pitch and they need to interrupt you, you know, to get clarification on something, then if the writer either can't answer the question or gets thrown by the question and then can't, you know, kind of regain their place in the pitch, that to me is the kind of most common problem I think that I've seen, especially with young writers.
Sure.
And I always tell people, you know, you have to know that story like the back of your hand, and you have to practice it and practice the pitch, you know. Find, you know, people in your life who are willing to let you sit them down and tell them, you know, do a 10-minute pitch or a 20-minute pitch, depending on what your material is, and you know, and then have them ask you questions about it and make sure that you can answer those questions, and make sure that you can, you know, when the executive has to stop you to take a phone call, or when they get called, you know, out of the room because there's an emergency or something, that you know, are able to just jump right back in and keep pitching and not be flustered or thrown.
Well, in the classes that we teach here for screenwriters, we actually practice pitches all semester. so that they get very comfortable with it, because most, as you know, the majority of writers are a little bit on the shy side and sometimes tend to not want to be talking to people in a room. They're so nervous about it. So you're correct that the practice sort of makes it comfortable and natural, hopefully natural, and not seem canned.
Yes.
So,
absolutely.
Absolutely. So what in the storytelling should writers concentrate on in the pitch? The whole story? What parts should they concentrate on when trying to pitch to an executive and sell a story?
That definitely depends on whether it's a feature or a TV show, because they are different. So in features, you want, and I'll tell you, I actually, when I was at the Three Rivers screenwriting conference as a panelist, I taught a class about pitching, and one of the things that one of the people in the class asked me was, I've been told that I should never pitch the ending to my movie. And I said, no, that is the worst advice. Do not follow that advice. Do not listen to that advice. Nobody is going to buy a script from you if they don't know how it ends.
That's a crazy piece of advice. I've heard students say that to me too, and it is crazy.
Yeah, apparently there is somebody out there, I don't know who it is, but somebody out there is reaching people, some, script guru or something, and telling them not to pitch the ending to their screenplay.
Why would any producer put lots of money into a script and not know how it works?
That's what I say. That's what I tell them. And when I say that, they're like, "Oh, yeah, that's true." So I don't know. I can only guess. I can only guess that this is to kind of build some suspense or mystery. But nobody is going to buy your script if they don't know how it ends. I mean, that's in many ways the most important part, because if you sit through a 2-hour movie and it does not have a satisfying ending, it's going to be panned, it's going to be derided. So it has to, you have to tell people how your movie ends. So, so the first thing I tell people when they're pitching a movie is it has to have a beginning, a middle, and an end.
Good old Aristotle, huh?
Pardon?
Good old Aristotle.
Yes, exactly. I mean, so much of this is straight from the Poetics, and it hasn't changed, in all of these years. Just the tenets of good storytelling. And now, when you're pitching a movie, you want to pitch the log line, which is, a 1 or 2 or maybe 3 sentence summary of, what your story is. You want to always pitch the genre, which I tell people that's very important as well, because you could be launching into a pitch about your movie, and people could, just based on the components of your story, people could assume that it could be many different genres. And the example that I always like to give to people to explain this point is the movie Bruce Almighty. I don't know if you remember that Jim Carrey movie.
Oh, definitely.
But, the log line is a man gets the powers of God, or that could be the log line, a man gets the powers of God. And I say to people, that could be a horror movie. A man gets the powers of God, and then he, uses it to, make life on earth a living hell, Or it could be a sappy melodrama. A man gets the powers of God, and he uses them to bring his dying wife back from the brink of cancer. It could, it doesn't have to be an outrageous comedy. So it really, you need to set the genre when you are pitching, one of the very first things that you say about your movie should be the genre. This is a comedy about a man who gets the powers of God, or, whatever your story is. This is a historical drama about, how a young woman became the Queen of England. Whatever it is, whatever your story is.
Try this one for size. A young girl joins forces with 3 strangers to kill an elderly woman. That's the storyline for The Wizard of Oz. Okay.
Right. Now that sounds to me like a horror movie,
Yes,
right?
of course, but that is it's not inaccurate. It's just the wrong tone, the wrong portrayal, everything. But it's
Right.
it's a completely accurate telling of what that story is. A young girl joins forces with 3 strangers to kill an elderly woman. That's The Wizard of Oz. But that's not what the movie is, and that's not how we remember it. So
Right.
So yes,
Right.
how you pitch it is really important. Okay.
Yeah, absolutely.
So let's move on to a few other things here. Do you okay? So you spent a lot of time working in animation, and so did I. Of course, you worked more in features, and I worked in television. Although you did some TV animation as well. For you, what is the difference when you're creating a story, if there is one, between writing for an animated television show and writing for a live-action television show? What would you, from your perspective, what are the differences?
Okay, I haven't actually written for TV animation, but I've done consulting in that area.
Okay.
So I can tell you from my perspective, the difference is really, and this applies to television and film, between live action and animation. The key difference is what we call animation imperative, and that just simply means, I know you know what it means, but for your audience. It just simply means what is the reason that this is being animated,
right,
as opposed to being made in live action.
Right.
Because animation is expensive, and if one of the main factors, especially in features, when deciding if a story is on the line as to whether it could be told in live action or animation, one of the decisions often comes down to budget. Would it be cheaper to make this movie as a live action movie, or would it be cheaper to make this movie as an animated movie? And when you're doing features in animation, they're incredibly expensive, hundreds of millions of dollars, because it's so labor intensive and it's very time consuming. These movies take years, and they take hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of people to put them together. And to go back to your original question, animation imperative. Why are we making this in animation? Is it about animals that are anthropomorphized animals, or superheroes, or something that would be easier or cheaper to do in animation than it would in live action?
Right.
That's a big reason. And then also, and I would say kind of hand in hand with that, just creatively, is this something, and the lines are being blurred so much today because CG, computer aided graphics are so amazing now that it really does blur the line in a lot of ways between what is animated and what's live action. If you just look at shows like Noah Hawley's new show on FX, I'm trying to remember what it's called.
I know exactly what you're talking about, and I'm drawing a blank too.
Yeah, but I mean, it's such an amazing
not Stranger
mix.
Things.
No, I think it's Legion. Is it Legion? I think it's Legion.
Well, those of you listening to this, look it up.
Yeah, Noah Hawley's show on FX, not Fargo, the other one, the other show. Right. It's just, I mean, it's such a creative, mind-bending, mind-blowing use of CG and live action together to create just these stunning worlds. And that is, I would argue, because it's the show is still primarily about people, as opposed to, animals or aliens or some other creatures that would be, better drawn in, animation. That is a show that that really pushes the boundaries between live action and animation and blends them in such a beautiful, beautiful way that it absolutely should be a live action show. It should not be an animated show, because I think it would take away from the gravitas of the emotions if the people that we were watching going through these experiences weren't actual, weren't real people, if they were drawn.
Right. It is sometimes strange to me why some movies are animated, because or TV shows for that matter, because they're just people. Mm-hmm. But then you can see perfect examples of, for lack of a better word, people in a show like The Simpsons, which has gone on for 27 or 8 years, and it's people. It's not really animals, but it cries out to be animated. So making that determination, I think, for a production company is not necessarily easy. Clearly, it calls for it with cute animals or not cute animals, or with sort of some kind of science fiction or something that's very otherworldly. It cries out for it. But as you say, CG, computer graphics, have made it so that live action can do a whole lot of what used to only be able to be done with animation. So, so it becomes a monetary consideration, and it becomes I guess, an artistic one as well. When you were working on, you've done a bunch of stuff with hand-drawn animation like Tarzan and the Iron Giant. And did you find that process to be difficult, fulfilling? How did you think of that process?
The animation process or the development process?
Well, clearly the development process, but even just working on an animated story.
Oh, I loved it. I mean, I loved it in some ways. You do have a luxury of time that you don't have in live action, where you're shooting, once you've shot the scene, that ship has sailed. You're not going to be going back and changing anything. I mean, unless, in the rare case of reshoots, which are, expensive and, the kind of the reshoot budget is saved for just very, very crucial, important things.
Sure.
So in animation, you do have a little bit more, this kind of luxury of time, because things take so long, and especially when we're talking about 2D animation, which is, hand drawn. It is, the amount of time that it takes for a scene to be put together, things can be changed. If somebody says, they look at the animatic, which is kind of like an animated storyboard, a storyboard with some motion in it to give a sense of, how timing and how the story is playing out timing wise. If somebody looks at the animatic and says, I don't think that scene is really working, or I think we could make this much better if we did X, Y, or Z, you have the luxury in animation to make those changes that you don't in live action.
Sure, it's much easier to do reshoots, retakes.
Yes, yeah. So that part of it I like. On the flip side, it takes so long.
Forever.
It takes so many years to make these animated. I worked in animation for. I was at Warner Brothers for 5 years, and the Iron Giant was finished after I left.
Wow.
It was still in production when I left.
Wow.
Or in post production when I left. It just takes so many years to make these movies. So that part of it, is more frustrating.
So let's talk about you for just a moment. Your background seems to be filled with sci-fi and fantasy and things of supernatural, or whatever you want to call it. What has inspired you to go down that road? What were your earliest influences?
My earliest influences, I mean, maybe just in that genre, Twilight Zone was a huge, made a huge impression on me.
The original or the remake?
Oh, the original.
The original.
The original.
The Rod
Yeah,
Serling.
I mean, I know yes, yes, the Rod Serling. I think I've seen a little bit of the remakes, which I remember enjoying, but they were remakes of the original. They were just, the same stories, just slightly updated. So yeah, I would say in that, and then more, as a kid, my earliest influence was Agatha Christie and mysteries, and it to this day is my favorite genre is mystery.
Yeah.
Even though I've written one mystery that's a comedy that hasn't been produced, a feature. But
a comedy
and then
mystery.
the TV show, yes. Mm-hmm.
That's interesting.
Yeah, it's really. I think it's one of the best things I've written, but apparently nobody else does because it hasn't been made yet. But
you mean nobody has yet?
Yes, yes. But then the TV show that I did for the SyFy Channel, The Lost Room, is also a mystery.
Yes.
Has a mystery format. So I would say Agatha Christie, Twilight Zone. Those were my most. Those are the most influential, genre. And then comedy-wise, when I was a kid, I just loved Soap, the TV show Soap, which it's interesting. I've watched it since now as an adult, I've rewatched it, and it's interesting. It's interesting how slow it seems because the editing now is so different, and comedy, is almost every sitcom that you can think of on TV now is done with the breaking the fourth wall, the interview, talking directly to the camera, the interview style, which is so different than, the way sitcoms used to be. So very different, but still makes me laugh like nothing else.
That was Susan Harris, correct?
Yes.
Yep.
Yes.
I remember that show was revolutionary. I think it had the first sort of major gay character on it was Billy Crystal. I'm pretty sure.
Yes, Billy Crystal.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's right.
Indeed.
Yeah, I think the first first interracial couple too, maybe.
Oh, maybe.
I'm trying to remember.
Maybe.
Yeah.
So have you always been a writer? When did you start writing?
Well, yeah, I mean, I always wanted to be a writer from a really young age. I think I was 4 when I decided that I wanted to be a writer. Yeah, of course, I also wanted to be a waitress at Long John Silver's. In the interim, I wanted to be a ballet dancer. So there were other things too that I wanted to do, but that was, that's the one that stuck.
That's quite a choice there. A waitress at Long John Silver or writer.
Yeah. It was a tough call.
Although being a waitress, if you're very observant, you might come up with a lot of stories. So
that's right, and a lifetime supply of fish and chips. That was the real selling point for me. But
so, all right, so let's go back a half a step to The Lost Room, because that's a wonderful credit that you have. Was it your idea, or was it your partner's idea, or did somebody give you the idea? How did you come up with it, and how did you then take that to where it became a series? Sort of just briefly walk us through how that works.
Sure. Yeah. No, it was actually it was a combination of 3 different ideas, or 3 different kind of forces. It was the writer who I was working with at the time, Chris Leone, and Chris and I had a mutual friend from college named Paul Workman, and we used to get together every Thanksgiving, just because we all had time off, and it would be a time where we could visit with each other. And so it was, it was a Thanksgiving holiday weekend, and we were. Paul lives in Northern California, and he had come down to Los Angeles to visit, and we were just kind of brainstorming about things. And Paul had this idea in college that Chris had always really liked about a man who, about a motel room that could kind of take you anywhere you wanted to go in the world just by opening the door.
That's a really good idea.
Yeah, it was a super cool idea, right? And so Paul had this idea, and Chris had always remembered it because it was such a cool idea. And at the same time, Chris had at this time in our careers, Chris had an idea that he wanted to explore about a kid who found a magic talisman, like a Stephen King-ish kind of idea. A kid who finds this kind of magic talisman, and and it kind of leads him into this seedy underworld of back alleys and diners, and but he didn't know where to go with it. And we were talking about this, and I said, well, what if we combine Paul's idea and Chris's idea and try to create a world, with that, where these magic objects are coming out of this motel room. And so that was and then it just exploded, and we just spent the whole rest of the weekend writing down as much of the story as we could think of, who the characters would be, what the objects would be, that kind of thing, who would be after the object, who would be the good guys, who would be the bad guys. So that's how that story came to be.
And how quickly did it come together as a script? How quickly did you have it put together as a project?
Well, what we did, we had never written for television at that point. We'd only done features. So we got, I think our agent gave us an example of what a TV format or a TV show Bible would look like, and we tried to approximate that, with the material, like put it into a TV show format, and then we started pitching it to different studios to different studios and networks and producers, and that process lasted for many years. Everybody kept passing on it because it was
how many years? How many years is years?
I want to say, I think, I'll tell you this: between the time we created it and it aired, it was 6 years.
Wow.
So I believe maybe we finally sold it after 4 years, and then we did a year of development of writing, and then it sat on the shelf for a year, and then the following year it got greenlit and then went into production, and then from the day it was greenlit to the day it aired, it was about 1 year.
So okay, this is a good lesson for folks that may not be familiar with the way Hollywood works. Every project has its own life and lifespan, but it can take many years, and you have to have the fortitude to stick around with something for a while if you really believe in it. You must have believed in it wholeheartedly.
Absolutely. Yes, that is so true. I mean, I have heard, I don't know if this is how accurate this is, but I would believe it. I've heard the statistic that the average movie that is made, from conception or development to hitting the screen is 10 years.
I think that's correct.
I would believe that. And I know, I know many scripts that I read, 10 years ago that are just now,
wow,
coming out as movies.
Same for Broadway, by the way. It's the same thing there. It's anywhere from 8 to 12 years.
Right, because there's such a long development workshop process. Yeah.
It does. It takes almost an absurd amount of time, but that is really the way it works. Okay, so I'm curious. Along the way, you surely must have gotten your share of thoughts and notes from any number of people. Let's talk about notes for 2 seconds, and that is, what are your thoughts on when someone gives you notes or when you're giving notes? how do you receive notes, and how do you like to give notes? Talk about note giving and taking.
Okay. Let's see. When I try to be as open-minded as possible when someone gives me a note, because even if I don't agree with the note, I realize that there is something in the script that caused this person to give this note, even if they don't know exactly what it is, or even if they have misidentified the problem. I feel like, especially if I hear the same note multiple times, I feel, and I completely still disagree with it. I completely say, no, that's wrong, and here's why. I acknowledge that there is something that I need to take a look at that is causing, this note to appear. And so a lot of times I'll tell people who are getting notes for the first time, or who feel like they're getting a lot of stupid notes, or that nobody read their script properly or didn't understand it, I'll tell them to try to pay attention to the spirit of the note rather than the letter of the note.
Right.
So that they're they're trying to figure out what caused this, what caused somebody to have a problem with this character or with this story beat, and then address it from that point of view.
I found over time that sometimes a note that makes no sense will actually trigger something totally different, and solve some other problem, or start something, part of the process that's new. So I think taking what you're saying is valuable. That notes doesn't matter whether you agree with them or not. You should pay attention to them.
You should absolutely pay attention to them, and especially if you're in a situation where somebody has paid you, to write something,
Sure.
or they've bought your script and now you are doing, you have to pay deference to those notes. And a lot of times what I'll do, especially if it's a note that I think is terrible and I know it's not going to work, what I will do when I come back, to them, either with the revision or with the discussion about, how I'm going to address these notes, I'll say, so I tried your note about blah, 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 whatever the note was, and this is the problem that it caused for me. It completely unraveled, it had this, pulling the string on the sweater effect, and it completely unraveled this other storyline, and who would have known, who would know that would happen, but that happened. And so do you still want me to pursue that note, or do you think we should table it for now?
Well, that's a fantastic technique.
Thank you. Yeah, I mean, you need to kind of work with people, not see them as your enemy, even if they're giving you horrible notes, because you're putting the ball back in their court. You're saying, okay, here, I executed your note. Here's what happened. Is that what you want? I don't think so. I don't think you want this whole storyline to unravel, but, or let's talk about, is there some other way that you can think of to, address this note? So you're putting it back in their court, and you're showing them that you did address the note. You did your due diligence.
You didn't ignore them, and you've proven the error of their ways, because frequently notes given are whimsical or off the cuff, and they turn out to be something they've even forgotten about the next time you bump into them. So
that's so true.
But
yeah.
it's
so true. Yeah. And also, even the best notes, and I can tell you this from the other side of the table, like having worked as an executive, a lot of times when you are not the person who originated the material, when you didn't write the material, you don't know it as intimately as the writer. You don't know that, giving this note is going to, cause this butterfly effect or this ripple effect, somewhere else in the script. But it may be a perfectly valid note, but again, going back to the spirit versus the letter, the spirit of the note might be right, but, it has some unintended consequence, and you have to then, weigh that. So a lot of times these notes aren't, they're not don't think anybody ever gives notes with some, malicious intent or,
No.
they just don't understand sometimes, why they can't be incorporated or why they can't be addressed. And then that's the writer's job to tell the producer or the executive that in a way that is not defensive or, insulting.
I think that is really terrific. I like to think of it as sometimes a note will be pulling a thread on a very finely woven knit sweater, and it just all starts to unravel, and that can
Always,
be a real big problem. So, surely in your time in Hollywood, you have met lots of people and you've dealt with a lot of circumstances. Can you think of any kind of an oddball story or something that has happened to you along the way that would be something fun and interesting for our listeners?
Sure. Yeah, I'll tell you a funny story that happened to me when I was an executive at Warner Brothers, actually. So I was in a meeting, and my assistant brought a package into my office and said, this just arrived, and I don't know what it is, and I thought maybe you did and that you'd want to see it. And so I look at this package. It's a box. It's in a brown wrapping paper, and there's no return address, and it's postmarked from Idaho. And this was right at the height of the Unabomber scare.
Oh,
and I don't know if all of your listeners remember the Unabomber, but
Ted
it was
Kaczynski.
this Ted Kaczynski, this very disturbed man who was sending bombs in the mail to people in brown paper packages. And I think at the time that I got this package, he had sent like this big manifesto to the New York Times that the New York Times had published. And I just said to my assistant, you know what? I'm not comfortable opening this package. And he said, okay, I'll take it to the legal department. And so I didn't think anything else about it. And then that afternoon, again, I was in a meeting and knock on the door, and I thought it was my assistant, and I said, come in, and it was the Burbank police. And there were two police officers, and they said, excuse me, we need to speak with you right away. And so now I had actually forgotten about the package. So I'm thinking, oh, my God, something happened to my husband. I just didn't know what this was about. And so they said, is there someplace we can go and speak in private? And so we went. I ended my meeting. They came into my office. They closed the door. And I said, what's happening? And they said, we need to ask you some questions. And so then they started asking me all of these questions about my personal life. And I'm thinking, what is in this box? What could it, did somebody send me a severed head? Or, I just couldn't imagine why the police were there. And they wouldn't, and I kept asking them, and they wouldn't tell me what was in the box. And so they said, they just kept kind of deferring my questions and then asking their own questions, like, did I have any crazy ex-boyfriends, jealous ex-boyfriends? Did I, had I ever received any death threats before? I mean, they were asking me just this. It seemed like it went on forever. And so finally, after a few minutes, they stopped asking questions, and they just sat there and they were looking at me. And I said, can you please tell me what is in the box now? And they said, we don't know. Let's go find out. And apparently they were trying, I know now in retrospect, they were trying to determine if I could be the target of a threat. They did not want to open the box until they were kind of satisfied that it wasn't a threat. So we went down into the basement of the building, and they had this device that was like a pair of scissors on a long like on a long pole, basically, that they used to open the box.
They use those to prune trees.
Oh, okay. Well, okay, that's what they had somehow. I guess it was like a bomb squad. I don't know. But anyway, we all stood there, a safe distance away, and they opened the box, and glitter and confetti came out. And this was somebody's idea, and I'll tell all your listeners right now, bad idea.
Bad idea.
Somebody's bad idea of a clever pitch. And was, there was a treatment in there, and there was a crown, like a handmade crown, and all this glitter and confetti. And I was so mortified, so embarrassed that the police spent all this time on this situation. So that is a crazy, so everybody listening, do not send an anonymous pitch.
Yes, but the question is, did they get the job?
I'll leave that up to your imagination.
All right. So we're coming toward the end of today's story beat, and I'm just wondering if you have one solid piece of advice or a great tip that you can give to our listeners, especially those perhaps starting out and trying to find their way in the industry or in the world of entertainment. So something you can lend to our listeners.
Yes, and it's kind of a two-parter, and it goes back to what we were talking about earlier, when we were talking about how long it takes to develop things and how long it takes for things to come to fruition. So the first part of the tip is I have learned to never put all of my eggs into one basket.
Excellent.
Because, the things that you think are the surest things, the things that you think are the best things, often end up either never happening at all or taking the most time.
Sure.
So you need to always have multiple projects, at different stages of development. And that goes for anything from pitching. If you are lucky enough to have somebody read your script and then want to meet with you about it, you have to go into that meeting with more than just that script, at least in your head. Because the first thing they're going to ask you when you're done talking about that script is, what else do you have? And you don't want to be caught with, nothing to say. So you always need to be developing more than one idea. And then the second kind of part of that advice, which is also something that I learned from being an executive, is that it's really hard to know when you get rejected. Everybody takes rejection personally. When your script gets a pass or doesn't get bought, or if you get fired, from whatever project that you're working on. But it's almost impossible to know how many decisions are going on behind the scenes that you'll never be aware of that go into that decision, to pass or to not, and it's so, because we only have our own point of view, it's so easy to make it personal and think they didn't like my script, they didn't like me, when, more than half the time it's some political, like, oh, we already have, I forgot, we already have a romantic comedy that we're doing this year. We don't have a budget to buy more romantic comedies. Or, oh, we already have a deal that we need to, we have an overall deal with XYZ writer, and we need to service that deal. So, you know what? We're not going to buy any more scripts this year. Or, we have, we want to, we don't have enough money to buy this in our budget. There's just so many different reasons that can have absolutely nothing to do with you that result in you getting a rejection. So I think if more people were aware of that, they might not give up as easily. They might keep plugging away and, knowing that at some point the right the stars are going to align and the right set of circumstances are going to happen and the right person is going to read their script and it's all, and then it's all going to happen.
Well, that is such excellent and wise advice. And to add on top of that, Thomas Jefferson once said, luck favors the prepared mind. So the more that you prepare and the more that you do, the better the chances are that people will recognize that and give you the chance that you're looking for. Laura, this has been a terrific hour of conversation, and I really greatly appreciate you coming on StoryBeat today. Thank you.
Oh, you're so very welcome. The pleasure was mine.
Today's StoryBeat tip: unforgettable stories are never about objects, places, or events. Such things are just background for the real story, which always focuses on the interactions of humans or human surrogates, typically anthropomorphic creatures such as Wall-E, C-3PO, or HAL 9000. That intense World War II story that you so deeply love will really be about characters caught up in the middle of the war, not about the war itself. Even the documentary about World War II that you enjoy watching on the History Channel is likely to be about people dealing with events and not merely the events themselves. Places, events, and objects provide the background against which characters are set. This in no way diminishes the importance of settings, events, or objects, for those are essential elements of any story's structure. But remember, worthy stories are always about the struggles of a character or characters striving to reach a powerful goal. And so we've come to the end of today's StoryBeat. This podcast would not have been possible without the generous support of the Center for Media Innovation on the campus of Point Park University. Until next time, I'm Steve Cuden, and may all your stories be unforgettable.